morning we have a couple of truly cheery scripture readings. And me listening to you read those, I could even hear the catch in your voice. We can't hear these words of lament, of Job's cry, without feeling it ourselves. It's really our story. It's the same story age after age after age. It's the human truth. We all find ourselves, not infrequently, in despair, suffering, wondering where God is. Last week, we began discussing Job. And for those of you who weren't here, we took a moment to talk about the background of the book of Job, about how it's a book that predates the Jewish scriptures. It's an old Babylonian story with multiple gods who come together to debate about this guy whose name is Sagil-Kinamubib. And I'm sure you all remember that one from last week. But it's a story that doesn't really fit with the Jewish thought world, except insofar as that experience of suffering resonated. So the story was reworked a bit to make it a Jewish story. And there are parts of it that we find, even today when we read it, problematic. The idea of God and Satan making a bet over whether Job is going to be faithful or not. That doesn't fit with our theology. God and Satan making a bet. No. But what we know is that when bad things happen, we suffer. And like Job, we cry out. We cry out wanting to know, where are you, God? Why are these things taking place? Today's reading from Job is 22 chapters in. We have watched Job suffer. And suffer some more. And continue to suffer. We have watched as his friends have come and joined him to sit in the dust with him as he suffered. And those friends did a world of good. Sitting there quietly with Job and offering their presence makes a difference. As a hospital chaplain, I can tell you that when I walk into a room and I see a patient who is alone, I worry. But when I walk into a room and see someone who is accompanied in their illness, I know right there that there's a strength that other people don't have. Love and companionship really matter. So Job is there sitting in the dust with his friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, Zophar, and Elihu. Yes. He's sitting there with them, and their companionship helps carry him through his trauma. It's a beautiful scene. But then something happens. Eliphaz realizes that he understands exactly why Job is suffering. And that's never a good thing. Job, let me explain this to you, says Eliphaz. You're suffering because you did something wrong. Because in Eliphaz's world, good things happen to good people, and bad things happen to bad people, and everything makes sense. But Job knows that's not true. And he argues back. Then Bildad, he speaks up and says, now you see, Job, let me explain this to you. The reason that you're suffering is because Well, you've done something just to twist God's tail. God is not happy with you. You may not know what it is, but this is God's punishment. Oh, Bildad. Job says, no, I know that that's not true. And then Zophar, you know Zophar. Zophar says, let me explain this to you, Job. The reason that you're suffering is because God only blesses the righteous. God wants the faithful people to drive a Mercedes-Benz chariot. And clearly, because you're sitting in the dust, it means that you have loused up. But again, Job speaks up in his own defense. I believe that God is just, yes, but I also know that my suffering is not God's judgment. And then Elihu, friend number 4, who should have kept his mouth shut, says, look, Job, you're missing the point here. My 3 friends have all told you. The reason that you're suffering is because you have been a sinner, you have done the wrong things, and God is just out to get you. But Job knows better. I don't know if you've ever had somebody come and sit with you and explain that your suffering is because you are bad. Well, the last time I had someone explain that to me, I was actually sitting in the naughty boys corner. But that's a different conversation. You know the naughty boys corner? No. Yeah, where you send the little kid when he's actually been bad. But in our adult lives, the suffering that we experience is really random. We get sick, not because we've sinned. We have a car accident because the other guy ran the red light. Okay, sometimes it's because we did something. But illness, sickness, sorrow, suffering, they're just part of the mix. And we know that. But even so, we pour out our grief. We cry out to God, God, where are you in this? How do we deal with this suffering? Hurricane victims cry out. Children ripped from their families cry out. People who have lost a loved one cry out. People in hospital beds cry out. People whose jobs have been outsourced to India cry out. The psalmist cried out too. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far away from me? We know that cry, don't we? That's the cry that Jesus offered as he hung on the cross. Quoting Psalm 22, identifying with the suffering that all of us feel when we look for God and can't find God anywhere. But you know, that psalm that we heard the first 15 verses of goes on. It in fact is not just a psalm of lament. It goes on to become a psalm of praise. But you, O Lord, don't be far away. Oh, my help, come quickly to my aid, the psalmist writes. Deliver my soul from the sword, my life from the power of the dog. Save me from the mouth of the lion. From you comes my praise in the great congregation. My vows I will pay before those who fear God. The poor shall eat and be satisfied. Those who seek God shall praise the Lord. Those words of despair become hope. words of promise even, saying, all the ends of the earth shall remember and turn to the Lord. And all the families of the nations shall worship him. For dominion belongs to the Lord, and he rules over the nations. There's a little turn that happens in our suffering. Because when we look back, we can find how God has been present with us. Even when we're in the thick of it, we may not be able to see. We find our tears poured out in the moment. But then we find that God has been with us all the time. In his letter to the Hebrew Christians, the Apostle Paul wrote about God's presence in our suffering through Jesus, talking of how Jesus, our high priest, who was tested just as we are, but without sin, has helped God understand what we go through and helped us find God's presence, even in trial. And Paul wraps up this argument by saying, let us therefore approach the throne of grace with boldness, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. Let us approach with boldness. So often, at least in my experience, when I talk to God, the prayers that I offer are not bold prayers. They're prayers that say something like, God, this kind of stinks. Help. As opposed to the bold prayer, God, this is bad. Help me through it and help me make a difference. Surround me with people who don't preach at me, but instead hold my hand and help me move forward. Help me find that team of folks that you have called as supports, as people who love me. You've been there, haven't you? Finding yourself in those terrible moments surrounded with people who get you through. I know you have. I've walked with some of you through those times. I've heard you talk about how this church has helped you through the darkest moments, the scariest times and minutes, the times when you yourself couldn't even see a way forward. But unlike Eliphaz and Bildad and Zophar and Elihu, you found yourselves surrounded with people who didn't try and explain it, didn't even necessarily fix it, but sat with you and got you through your challenge. That, of course, is the core of our gospel. We can never do it on our own. We have Jesus, our high priest, who connects us with God, who points us to the God that we maybe can't see around us when we're in our suffering. And we have sisters and brothers in faith who accompany us on our journey, who work with us to give us a kick in the pants from time to time when we need it. But mostly, to hold our hands and wrap us in love. Dear friends, family, loved ones, we are together in this. In our suffering and in our hope. In our bold approach to our faith. And in the good news. The good news of God, who is indeed with us. Amen. Amen.